What's up, Internet? 2019 is in the rear view mirror, and you know what that means. I get to run as far away from these terrible games as I possibly can. It is, of course, time for the top 10 poop games of 2019. The games you should absolutely flush down the toilet on sight because they're awful and you should never want to play them. Now, before we begin with the list proper, I have to give anti-shoutouts to Driv 3er on the PS2. A game that was so bad it would have absolutely made this list, but the disc self-destructed out of shame while I was recording footage for this list. It was just so bad it could not handle the shame. Anyway, let's kick this off with the first in our list. Number 10 and winner of this year's Golden Lagoon Award for a game that was so abysmal, and yet I was so compelled that I couldn't stop playing it.
And why should I not go back there, pray?
Some people came to Cormoran when you left. They asked for you.
People? Tell me more. Swiftly now.
Warriors. Hard ones. Not very friendly.
This is Two Worlds. One of the worst RPGs on the Xbox 360. Not as bad as Arcana Gothic 4, mind you, but it's close. Nothing about this game works. The characters are ugly. The game has like one combat sound effect for every single weapon, just universally shared. You can actually get stuck in bits of the world, as I did. You can lose stuff in the world because swimming is just janky as hell. The story is incomprehensible. The voice acting, laughable. And yet, I couldn't stop playing it. Even though every second of being outside was stuttering and every enemy was the same. Even the giant dragons fought basically like all the tiny skeletons that were just completely boring enemies. It stops to load as you run around. Nothing about this game is functional. But I couldn't put it down until I 100% it. So I did. And now I don't ever have to touch this game again. But at least the sequel was better. But if you want a weird game that is awful in pretty much every regard, and yet kind of compellingly terrible, this one might be worth looking into. You know, for what recommendation that is. But let's carry on to number 9, where we have Volley Fire. I recently reviewed this. This is a game I found on numerous Game Boy multi-carts. It is better than my initial interpretation of what it is, but it's still a very, very simple and not great game. The idea is it's a one-on-one versus shmup, sort of, where you have to shoot between bits of environment to kill your opponent. Now what's interesting is when I first played this, I initially thought that this was all there is to it, and there kind of is. But as you move on between levels, it actually throws different environments, different obstacles, and occasionally different enemies your way, which is really cool. But it's still very much the same gameplay, and while there are power-ups in this game, they are pretty much universally power-downs. So, if you want a bad shmup on the Game Boy, Volley Fire is certainly there. If you collect Game Boy multi-carts, I'm sure you've seen this one. Not as bad as it could be, that's why it gets this sort of lofty position, but it's still not a game I would tell you to seek out by any means or measure. Let's carry on to number 8. We have Naughty Bear. A game that showed so much promise and sounded so interesting. I mean, it's basically Hitman with goofy stuffed teddy bears. How could you screw that up? How? Well, it turns out that you basically just have one level and you recycle it over and over and over and over. There's very little actual strategy or setup to any of this. Like, you can set up one or two traps, but for the most part, you're just running around sabotaging stuff and trying to sneak up on people. And even then, it just feels bland and samey. I honestly have not played too much of this game. I only played the first 3 or 4 chapters, but they all just feel the same. All the characters are identical. And sure, they add different obstacles and stuff as you go. It never iterates, it never changes, it never becomes something more than basically what the training mode to this is. It's basically identical, and it's really sad because, you know, goofy stuffed bear Hitman is awesome sounding. I love the Hitman games. This is Hitman if Hitman had zero effort put in. And it sucks I have to say that because I was so excited to play this. It's not terrible, but it's certainly not good by any means. Let's flush that one and move on to number 7. We have Assassin's Creed Revelations. Man, they screwed the story, the finale, the ending tale of their best character. Ezio Auditore da Firenze is the best character Assassin's Creed has ever had. I'm just throwing that out there. And I don't think I'm going to have too much pushback on that. Where he had an amazing start, and it kind of lukewarm. It was fun from a gameplay perspective, story not so much. Second iteration, this one has nothing going for it. You know what it has? Tower defense. An awful first-person platforming that is completely without value. You want to learn more about Desmond, the blandest man alive? Of course you don't. Why would you ever do any of that? But what's interesting is this is the particular version on the Ezio collection. This game has over like 130 collectibles. All of them are reduced to 0 value in this collection. It is amazing how you can have a giant open world game with collectibles and make none of them have any value whatsoever. It is baffling. It has some of the worst upgrades of all time. You get a little hook that gives you an extra like couple inches of reach on jumping, unless you really like tripping people while you run by, which granted is probably the most enjoyable part about this game. But other than that, there is just nothing to this one. It is a disservice to their best character in this series. And it really kills me that I have to say that, because, come on, it's another Ezio game. It should be awesome, or at least fun, and it's not. And what's worse is somehow this version is even buggier than the original. Like, there is just no reason to play this particular iteration of this awful game. It's just sad and depressing considering what it could have been and what it sadly is not. But let's carry on slowly through this monolith task of talking about some of the worst stuff ever. We move on to number 6, Monster Rancher Hop-a-bout, Monster Farm Jump, whatever you want to call this. They tried to take a monster raising RPG simulation type thing with some really interesting, unique mechanics, and they turned it into a pogo stick racing game? Except that the pogo sticks control like spaceships with 0 sense of actual control, and everything's on ice. This game is just awful. Like, there's just nothing to this. I haven't played any of the other games in the series, but I'm pretty confident in saying this is probably the worst game in the series. This has nothing to do with what Monster Rancher was about, and it has nothing to do with what a good game is about. It's weird, and it's interesting, but it ain't good. Let's carry on to number 5, where we have to, unfortunately, delve into the depths of the darkness with Alone in the Dark. Oh man, this game hurts to play. It's not well written, it's not interesting, it's a terrible, like, third-person kind of shooter survival nonsense thing that has a weird reliance on physics at times. The first thing it tells you to do is blink, a mechanic that immediately gets taken away from you, which is good because it's the stupidest thing ever. And yet, even though I'm not using it here just to prove a point of how dumb it is, even when you can see what's going on in this game, you can't see what's going on in this game. Frequently, the camera just snaps around in like these weird action shots that are supposed to make it seem like cinematic or something, but it really is just disorienting and confusing. I have no idea what half the stuff that was going on in this opening sequence were. Just because the camera was jumping around so much, it was hard to focus on anything. I mean, if it did one thing right, the firefighting mechanics in this game are kind of good, I guess? But nothing else about it is. I mean, hell, the visuals are so bad that your damaged outfit is literally like patches of skin put over top of your coat. It's just bafflingly ugly. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't look good. For whatever reason, there's a weird mechanic in this game that, if I may loosely quote the box from what I remember, lets you play it like a DVD by skipping bits of the game that you don't want to play. Like, this game is so bad, they realize you don't want to play it, skip ahead to the end, which will be disappointing to say the least. This game is awful in pretty much all regards. But it ain't as bad as number 4. Nice Code Games. I don't care which one, take your pick. I played over 100 of these bastards on a multi-card I have, and they are all awful. The best ones are basically remakes of Intellivision games, and those ones are kind of sort of enjoyable in a loose sense. And you know what, Nice Code, I will give you Orchard Kavas because that was actually a really good Intellivision game. You can have that. You can take that, put that on your wall. We made Orchard Kavas. It wasn't the worst thing ever. The rest of your games are all garbage. And when they're not being garbage, they're stealing their own garbage to make, like, clone iterations of their own garbage. And the worst thing is, they're at best boring. And at worst, they are unplayable, they look awful, and they sound like some of the worst things you could ever put on a Famicom cart. And I had to play 100 of these in the past year. It is... I don't know how I did that. And I genuinely hope no one else has to, because I think these games were designed to pad out multi-carts, not to actually be played. Because there's not much in any of these to actually be played. They're just terrible, terrible filler that you should ignore or burn with a fire. Because seriously, this world needs less of that. Moving on to number 3, we have all of the wrestling games ever. Seriously, I think I unintentionally this year came across like 30. But let's just pick the objective worst one for the sake of just picking one. MTV Wrestling Celebrity Deathmatch, whatever. This game is offensive to all the senses. It is ugly, it sounds bad, it doesn't play well, and nothing about this is entertaining. At best, it's just embarrassing. I am embarrassed that I own a copy of this. And I got this in a bundle, so, you know, I kind of couldn't say no. It was just sort of, well, I got this other thing, so I guess I gotta have this too. This is painful for me to have even recorded this. This is painful for me to own. It's so bad. Don't play MTV Celebrity Deathmatch. I mean, I would extend that and say don't play wrestling games, but I know people like them. I don't personally, but this one is just, I think everyone can agree, objectively bad in every sense of the word. And apparently this existed all the way back on the PS1 and just got remade on all the later generation of consoles because I guess someone thought we wanted more of this. I have no words to explain why that was dumb. But it exists, and I own it, and here it is. Don't play it, it's bad. Let's quickly forget about that and move on to number 2. Oh god. EDF Insect Armageddon. This game physically hurts to talk about. I love EDF. It's a fantastic little budget series that has some of the cheesiest lines ever, some of the goofiest gameplay, and just some of the best, most pure gameplay concepts ever. Seriously, go watch my Game of the Year list, go watch my review of it to see how bad this is. This is a game that was made by a completely different developer that didn't really seem to understand that. I kind of have trouble believing that the developers even played EDF before making this, because it doesn't seem like it's trying to take advantage of all the strengths of EDF, that it is a budget game, and that it is completely championing the fact that it is a cheap B-movie type experience, and it's waving that flag proudly. No, this is a gritty, grim, dark military shooter that plays like EDF. This is a game that feels like it's embarrassed to be around EDF. If EDF was like this goofy, really pure video game, like B-movie experience, this is like some really low-budget game trying to masquerade as a higher-budget game that's trying to be all grim and serious, and just, it doesn't get anything that it's supposed to be. It is embarrassed to be what it is, and that just kills it entirely. And unfortunately, from what I hear, the newest one is much the same, which is really, really depressing to hear. But I guess I'll find out when I get a chance to play that. But, you know, I love that I got all the other EDF games through my Xbox Gold for free. This is a smear on that shining, pristine fact that I got the other EDF games, even though I already owned them. This cheapens it a bit, I think. But that's not the worst experience I've had this year. Nope, because we move on to number 1, the most poop game of 2019, Shepherd's Crossing. Oh, I cocked up with this one. I cocked up royally. You want to know how badly I cocked up with Shepherd's Crossing? Okay, the first time I went to buy Shepherd's Crossing, it was in a budget bin, like at a GameStop, And I bought this for the same price that I could have bought the entire Dot Hack collection and Odin Sphere. But I went for the thing that looked like, as it said on the back, was kind of like a mix between RPGs and Harvest Moon. And then, after I lost it, I saw it on Facebook earlier this year, selling for super cheap. And you know what? I cocked up buying that too, because I got this when I could have, from the same person for the same price, gotten the Grand Stream Saga, thus completing my Quintet RPG quartet, as well as Trails of Cold Steel 3. I hate this thing so much. You want to know what this game is? This is not Harvest Moon. It's a game that takes place on a farm. That's about as close to Harvest Moon as you're getting, though. What this game is that really shitty trading sequence from Ocarina of Time that gets you the big Goron sword. Except that's the entire game. Literally, this game is divided into chapters, where you have to collect X number of Y material, trade it for Z material, and then trade Z material for A material, until you get to the point where you've got the highest level material for that chapter. Then you move to the next chapter and start again, until you eventually have the highest material, and then you do nothing. That is what this game is. This is a game that has nothing to it. The best thing about this game really is just randomly passing the time and seeing what nature events kind of occur. Seeing butterflies flying and like bees and stuff. Like that's at least something, but you're pretty much stuck on your farm with nothing to do other than occasionally like harvest materials and then trade them. And that is like 100% of the entire game right there. And in that regard, this is worse than the original Game Boy Harvest Moon, which was abysmal. And it's really baffling that something managed to surpass that really terrible first iteration of Game Boy Harvest Moon that had basically nothing going on, and yet this did it spectacularly. Oh my god, I hate this game so much. But the nice thing is, in owning it, I don't have to make the mistake again of buying it instead of something awesome for the same price. So, silver lining, I guess? Anyway. That was my worst game of 2019. Oh, I hate this thing so much. But I want to hear what your worst games of 2019 were, because trust me, I'm sure there's tons of awful games that have been played over this past year that I don't know about. And I should probably know about if I'm going to talk about them in the future, or at the very least avoid like the plague, because I probably should. I have to talk about all the games, so I'll get them eventually, I'm sure. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this list of awful, awful games. I hope you avoid them like the plague, unless you're some sort of weird masochist, in which case, Godspeed. And if you enjoyed, subscribe to the show to see more of what I do, because I do make a lot of stuff. And if you really want to make my day, check out the show's PayPal or Patreon. Support the show any way you can, so that I can actually afford to keep playing terrible, terrible games and making awful life decisions by purchasing them instead of good things, because I am a stupid person. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and you have a fantastic rest of 2019 and a great 2020. And until next time, peace out, Internet.